Hey guys, and welcome to Toby Talks Tech. My name is Toby and today we're going to talk some tech. In this video I want to try to answer the question of what is the best computer for Adobe After Effects, or for video editing, filmmaking, special effects, 3D and media heavy work in general. Now I know that the topic area, filmmaking, visual effects, is kind of related to Surface Studio, but I actually do want to get into quite a bit of the technical detail in this video. Also, I figured it might actually be a good excuse to make another episode for Toby Talks Tech. So in this video, I want to try to help you figure out what may be the best computer for you. First off, there is no such thing as a universal the best. The best is highly subjective. It will always depend on your requirements, your preferences, what you're trying to achieve, obviously your budget, and a whole bunch of other factors. So if you are looking for a really simple video that just tells you buy this computer or buy that laptop, then this is probably not the right video for you. Instead, what I want to do, in case you are currently looking to buy a new computer, a new laptop or a desktop because you want to get into Adobe After Effects, filmmaking and visual effects, what I want to do is I want to talk about the main components that are important in a computer, like your CPU, your graphics card, the RAM and your hard drives, to help you understand what you actually need to look for in a new computer and help you make a much better choice of where to actually put your money. Do keep in mind though that different software programs can obviously have very different hardware requirements for your computer, and one of the best ways to try to figure out where to even start is probably to make a list of the programs that you want to run and then go onto the website and check out the minimum hardware requirements. For example, if you want to run Adobe After Effects, the latest release, this is what Adobe recommends you get. An Intel processor that does support 64 bits, and obviously your operating system needs to support that as well. 8 GB of RAM, though 16 is recommended. Around about 20 GB of free hard drive space, and optionally a dedicated graphics card. Obviously, the minimum requirements are really just a rough guide and a starting point, and therefore I really want to talk about each of those components individually and really talk about what is required and what you should be looking out for. First, let's talk about the CPU. Obviously, keep in mind that this does vary from program to program, but in terms of Adobe After Effects, the CPU is highly critical for how well Adobe After Effects will perform. And the reason for that is that a lot of the effects in Adobe After Effects are not GPU accelerated, they are being calculated on your CPU. So I would recommend trying to get a processor with a high base frequency, and that is more important than getting a processor with a lot of cores that has a lower base frequency, because Adobe After Effects is not multi-threaded and a lot of the effects are not GPU accelerated. So a lot of the work will be done on a single core on your processor. So a high base frequency will do better than a multi-core processor with a lower frequency. That being said though, and I'll cover that again when we talk about the GPU, more and more effects in Adobe After Effects are now GPU accelerated, and multi-cores obviously will help you in the exporting process, because that's when it comes down to crunching numbers in media encoding. So that's when multi-core processors will do a bit better. So my rough recommendation would be to get a dual or a quad-core processor with a pretty high base frequency, maybe 2.8, around the 3 GHz if you really want to do some heavy visual effects work. Aim for that over the really heavy Xeon processors that have like 20 odd cores. It doesn't really help you that much for Adobe After Effects. Obviously other programs, for example Blender, do use multi-threading, and you need to look into which program you want to use just to figure out whether the more cores will really help you over a higher base frequency. Also, just very quickly, in terms of laptop versus desktop, if you're looking for power, performance and throughput, go for the desktop. The desktop will give you much more performance for your money. It'll just perform generally better. The reason I got a new laptop, a pretty fancy Alienware that I do a lot of my work on, is because I really need the portability over almost everything else. So I did go with the laptop, but if you have the choice, laptop versus desktop, go with the desktop. It'll be cheaper, it'll probably perform better. So just something to keep in mind. Next, let's talk about your RAM. RAM stands for Random Access Memory. This is a smaller cache that is closer to your CPU on the computer, and a lot of the temporary working files are being loaded into that. As you work with media, like in Adobe After Effects, you load in big files, your footage, stock footage, all sorts of other elements. All of that data is being loaded into RAM so that After Effects can access it really quickly. The more RAM you have, the more data, the more files, the more media you can hold in this cache, in this random access memory, and the faster Adobe After Effects will run. For basic work in 1080p or less, you're probably okay with 8 GB, though if you do plan to add some more complex visual effects, I highly recommend going at least 16. If you are looking to work with 4K or higher resolution, you should probably consider going maybe 32 GB, if not more. And the reason for that is simply the files are so much bigger, so After Effects can't hold them in RAM as much. And if your RAM runs out, it has to write those files off to disk. And then when you need to access those frames again or those effects again, it's to reload all that stuff from disk. So more RAM will always be better. Try to get quite a bit of RAM if you want to get into Adobe After Effects. 16 GB is probably be my recommendation if you are looking to do some serious work. Also, if you are looking more into the 3D programs like Blender, Houdini, and you want to do some simulations around physics, destructions, fluids, volumetric effects, get a lot of RAM, because all of that data can be huge, and the more you can get into RAM, the quicker the whole system is going to run. So do try to get quite a bit of RAM. I've seen people say they're okay with 4 GB of RAM, but I don't imagine that being the smoothest experience. So my rough recommendation, 8 GB is probably the minimum I would recommend for using Adobe After Effects. Next, let's talk about your GPU. There's a ton of powerful graphics cards out there, but a lot of them are actually aimed at gaming. Now, traditionally, if you think about how a graphics card actually works, a graphics card is kind of an intermediate. So from your computer, from your hard drive and your CPU, it receives a lot of data for textures, vertexes, meshes, 3D stuff. It does all of those calculations and it pushes them out to your monitor, and it does that really well. However, graphics cards traditionally can't actually feed information back to the CPU. It's kind of a one-way flow, and so they're not useful for helping out with any more general calculations. However, two technologies that enable this two-way communication from your CPU to your graphics card and back is CUDA and OpenCL. CUDA means Compute Unified Device Architecture, and it is proprietary to NVIDIA, so you will only find CUDA on NVIDIA cards. OpenCL, on the other hand, which stands for Open Computing Language, is an open standard to define this two-way communication, and it can be implemented by any graphics card manufacturers worldwide. And so you'll find OpenCL both on ATI as well as on NVIDIA cards. Now, a lot of modern software tools such as Adobe Premiere Pro since version CC 2014 heavily leverage your GPU to gain all of that performance back. Like Premiere Pro uses the Mercury Playback Engine, which is CUDA accelerated, so you get a lot of performance out of having a strong graphics card. When it comes to Adobe After Effects, however, very little is actually GPU accelerated. The 3D ray trace renderer is GPU accelerated. Some of the blur effects are GPU accelerated. But most of Adobe After Effects runs on a single thread on your CPU, so the graphics card doesn't actually account for a whole lot if you're looking purely at Adobe After Effects. That being said, there are actually quite a lot of third-party plugins for Adobe After Effects that will heavily rely on your GPU, like Element 3D from Video Copilot. It's obviously rendering, it has a 3D rendering engine that will use your graphics card, or plugins from Red Giant like Trapcode Particular, Denoiser, they're all GPU accelerated. So having a strong graphics card will actually help out. If you're looking at Adobe After Effects and Premiere Pro, I would go something that supports CUDA. I would go with an NVIDIA card. Also note that in general, CUDA will be faster than OpenCL, and the reason for that is because CUDA is proprietary. So if a company invests in implementing CUDA and supporting CUDA, they actually have the entire NVIDIA team helping them out, making sure that that works well, because it can be brand damage to both of them if it doesn't work. So CUDA is usually the faster of the two. So if you're getting into Adobe After Effects and you do want to use things like Element 3D, but also if you want to work in 3D like Blender, 3ds Max, Maya, Houdini, all of those tools, you leverage your graphics card, and I would recommend at this point go with an NVIDIA card. If you are looking for a specific card, the NVIDIA Quadro cards are actually really popular in the 3D industry because they have a lot of CUDA cores, so they can work really well with your CPU to help out and speed up all of those programs. But even if you just get a more generic gaming card like a GTX, right now I'm using a 1080, but I used to have a 760 for a long time, before that a 480 and a few other models before then. They work pretty well. You may get some driver issues every now and then, so you always have to make sure you have the latest graphics cards drivers installed whenever After Effects or Premiere Pro comes out with a new version. But in general, it's actually been working pretty well. Finally, let's talk about your hard drive. If you're looking to get into Adobe After Effects, Premiere Pro, Blender, 3D Studio Max, Maya, anything that relies heavily on big files being loaded from your hard drive and big data blocks being written back to your hard drive, I highly recommend to invest in a solid state drive. On a personal note, when I first switched to solid state drives, I couldn't believe the difference in performance. The whole system worked faster, all of our media got loaded really quickly into Adobe After Effects, into Premiere Pro. Files were written back and forth really quickly. It massively sped up my machine, so I highly recommend go and get yourself a solid state drive if you can afford it. Prices have come down dramatically from when they first came out, and they're really nice and sturdy. I've had mine for quite a couple of years now. They've held up fantastically, no issues at all. If you want to get a little bit into the technicalities, the problem with hard disk drives is that it actually blocks off spinning disks, and they have a read-write head on them, and so the speed is limited by how fast those disks can spin and how fast that read-write head can move into the position it needs to be over that disk to read your data. Solid state drives is like a block of RAM, it's like a USB stick. There are no moving parts in it. Everything is instantly accessible, and it's a much faster way of pulling data from the hard drive and pushing it back. Obviously, I don't feel like I have to elaborate too much on why that is important when you're doing video work or visual effects work, where everything is about loading giant files of media from your hard disk drive, be that your footage that you shot in 4K, maybe you got an 8K stock footage explosion somewhere, you've rendered out some layers, and all of those different elements need to be merged together, loaded from your hard drive, and then, written back out and exported. Or even Adobe After Effects does a lot of caching. So as you work, you may have noticed those little blue and green bars on the top of your workspace. Green means it's stored in your RAM. It's almost instantly accessible. That's the fastest. Blue means it's cached, but it's been written out to your hard disk drive. So at that point, the speed of your hard disk becomes really important. So SSDs will really help out there. And obviously, the more space you have both in your RAM and on your hard disk are going to make a big difference. But as a base recommendation, if you want to get into Adobe After Effects, video editing, special effects and all of that, get yourself at least one SSD and store your actual media files, your working files on there. Point your cache at that as well, just so that that works nice and fast. If you do find yourself having a bit of extra money, I can highly recommend go and get yourself a second SSD, even if that's quite a bit smaller. And on that SSD, install your operating system and your programs. So your operating system and your programs sit on one SSD, and all of your media sits on another one, so they can stream in parallel and you get a lot more speed out of it that way. But again, if you can't really afford that, at least get one SSD for all of your media. And that kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, I'm actually really keen to hear what you think, what your experiences are. Have you tried different things? What components do you think are great? It'd be amazing if you leave some comments and feedback down below, not only for me, but also for other people. Just leave all of that down below, have some discussions around what might be great, and try to help people out. One of the things I really like about this community is that people are so friendly and supportive. So just leave all of your feedback down below. Really keen to hear your thoughts in case I missed something, or I've said something silly, or I'm doing something that I could be doing better. So leave all of your feedbacks and anything you want down in the comment sections. I'm generally pretty good in keeping up to date and getting back to all of you. And that is all the tech I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to watch more, just click or tap these links over on the right hand side. If you want to support me in what I do on this channel, be sure to check out my Patreon page. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.